There's a sound you hear when the bombs begin to fall on Gaza. It isn't just the explosion, it's the sound that comes after. The sound of silence from places that are supposed to speak. A silence from capitals and palaces just across the border. A quiet from the great halls of global power. A carefully worded statement that says nothing at all. This silence is not empty. It is a political action. It is a choice. We see the images. A hospital wing collapses. A line of people waiting for bread is hit. A family is pulled from the rubble of their home. And we are told it is complicated. We are told it is a war between two equal sides. We are told it is a tragedy with no easy answers. But what if the answers aren't meant to be easy? What if the confusion is the point? For decades, the world has watched a repeating cycle in Palestine. An occupation, a resistance, and then a military response of overwhelming force. Each time the human cost is catastrophic, mostly for one side. And each time the world's response seems strangely muted. Why do the wealthiest Arab nations, who share a language and a culture with Palestinians, offer little more than statements of condemnation? Why does Egypt, the only Arab country to share a border with Gaza, often keep that border sealed, becoming a partner in a suffocating siege? Why do leaders in Europe and other parts of the world who speak of human rights lower their voices when it comes to this specific issue? And perhaps the most important question of all, why does the United States, the most powerful nation on earth, not only stay silent but actively fund and arm the very military that carries out these campaigns? This is not a story about ancient hatreds or a simple conflict over land. This is a story about power. It's about who has it, who wants to keep it, and who suffers from it. It's a story about how modern governments survive, how international politics really works, and how the words we use can be the most powerful weapons of all. This is the story of the politics of silence. When protests erupt in the West, we expect leaders to listen. We believe, at least in theory, that governments are accountable to their people. But in much of the Arab world, that relationship is flipped. The governments are not accountable to the people. They are accountable to the power that keeps them in place. To understand the silence of regimes in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, or Jordan, you have to understand their primary goal. It is not justice for Palestinians, it is the survival of their own regime. For generations, many of these kingdoms and authoritarian states have made a bargain. The deal is with the United States, in exchange for access to oil, for regional stability, and for cooperation on counterterrorism, the US provides the tools of survival. These tools are not just tanks and jets. They are diplomatic cover at the United Nations. They are advanced surveillance technologies to monitor their own citizens. They are a political shield against criticism. The scholar Madawi al-Rashid, in her History of Saudi Arabia, documents how the Saudi state has always balanced its religious identity with the hard-nosed needs of staying in power. Its leaders know that their population is deeply sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. They see the protests, they feel the anger, but they also know that their entire modern military, their entire security architecture, is built on American technology and goodwill. To truly challenge the United States on its support for Israel would be to risk everything. It would mean risking the flow of weapons, the intelligence sharing, the economic partnership. It would mean risking their throne. So they perform a delicate dance. They issue strongly worded condemnations. They send humanitarian aid. Their state-sponsored media might show images of suffering in Gaza. This is all to manage the anger of their own people. It's a pressure valve. But they will not take meaningful action. They will not, for instance, use their immense oil wealth as leverage, as they did in the 1970s. That world is gone. Today, their economies are deeply connected to the West. Their ruling families have fortunes invested in London and New York. They are part of the global system, and they will not risk their place in it. The intellectual Noam Chomsky called this relationship part of a fateful triangle. The United States, Israel, and the ruling elites of the Arab world. While the people of the region are locked out of the conversation, their leaders are locked in a system of dependency. They have become, in a sense, regional managers for a global superpower. Their job is to keep their own corner of the world stable. And challenging Israel, America's closest ally in the region, is the definition of instability. So, when we ask why they are silent, the answer is brutally simple. They are not silent out of a lack of feeling. They are silent out of a deep and rational fear. They know that the power that protects their regime is the same power that protects Israel, and they will not bite the hand that feeds them. Their survival is more important than their solidarity. This creates a strange and painful disconnect. The Arab public sees the events in Palestine as a profound wound to their identity and their sense of justice. They see their brothers and sisters suffering, but their leaders see it as a problem to be managed, a fire to be contained, so that the business of power can continue uninterrupted. The silence from the palaces is the sound of that cold calculation. If you look at a map, Gaza is trapped. It is bordered by Israel on two sides and the Mediterranean Sea on another, a sea patrolled by the Israeli Navy. There is only one other way out, a single gate into the Sinai Desert, a gate controlled by Egypt. It's called the Rafah crossing. For the over 2 million people crammed into the Gaza Strip, Rafah is a symbol of hope and of frustration. It is their only potential link to the Arab world that does not pass through Israeli hands. Yet, more often than not, that gate is closed. Many people ask a simple question. Why would Egypt, a powerful Arab nation, participate in the blockade of Gaza? Why wouldn't they throw the gates open to help the Palestinians? The answer, like everything in this story, is not about morality. It is about strategy. The Egyptian government has two major concerns that guide its policy toward Gaza. The first is its relationship with Israel and the United States. In 1979, Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel. It was a monumental event, and it came with a price and a reward. The price was being ostracized by the Arab world for years. The reward was becoming one of the largest recipients of U.S. military aid in the world, receiving billions of dollars every year since. That aid is essential for the Egyptian military, which is the backbone of the country's government. Keeping the border with Gaza controlled and stable is a core part of this peace agreement. Any chaos at the border is seen as a threat to the treaty and a threat to the flow of American money and weapons. The second reason is political. The group that governs Gaza is Hamas, and the Egyptian government views Hamas as an enemy. This is because Hamas is an offshoot of an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is Egypt's oldest and most organized political opposition group. In 2013, the Egyptian military led by current President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi overthrew a government led by the Brotherhood. Since then, the Brotherhood has been outlawed in Egypt, and its members have been arrested by the thousands. As the scholar Sarah Roy has documented, Hamas is not just a militant group. It is a social and political organization deeply woven into the fabric of Gaza. But for the Egyptian government, it is simply the Palestinian branch of their greatest domestic foe. They believe that an empowered Hamas in Gaza could inspire their own political enemies at home. They fear that weapons and fighters could flow from Gaza into the Sinai, destabilizing Egypt itself. So Egypt's actions at the Rafah crossing are a cold calculation. By keeping the crossing mostly closed, they achieve several goals at once. They suppress Hamas. They reassure Israel and the United States that they are a reliable partner in maintaining security. And they prevent any spillover of the conflict into their own territory. They will sometimes open the gate for a few days to allow some aid in, or to let a small number of wounded people out. This, much like the statements from the Gulf states, acts as a release valve. It gives the appearance of helping without actually changing the fundamental situation. But it makes Egypt a gatekeeper in the siege. Their strategic interests mean they become a participant in the enclosure of Gaza. For the people inside, it is a painful reality. One of their own Arab neighbors, a country they share history and culture with, holds one of the keys to their prison, and it refuses to turn it. The silence is not just in the Middle East. It echoes in the halls of parliaments in London, in the newsrooms of Berlin, and across the university campuses of North America. In the West, the conversation about Israel and Palestine is often paralyzed by a different kind of fear. The fear of a single word, the fear of being called an anti-Semite. This is one of the most difficult parts of the story to talk about, because it involves real pain and a history of terrible persecution against Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is real, it is dangerous, and it is on the rise globally. But critics and scholars, including many Jewish thinkers, argue that this real threat is sometimes weaponized. It is used as a tool to silence legitimate criticism of the State of Israel. The historian Norman Finkelstein, whose own parents were Holocaust survivors, wrote a book called Beyond Chutzpah. He argues that the charge of anti-Semitism has been systematically used to discredit anyone who points out Israel's human rights record. According to this view, a powerful narrative machine has been built. It works like this. If a human rights organization documents abuses by the Israeli military, they are accused of having an anti-Jewish bias. If a United Nations report condemns the building of illegal settlements, the UN is labeled a hotbed of anti-Semitism. If a student group on a college campus calls for a boycott, they are smeared as promoting hatred. If a politician questions the billions of dollars in unconditional aid sent to Israel, they are accused of threatening the safety of Jewish people, and their career is put at risk. This creates a powerful chilling effect. People learn to self-censor. Academics with expertise on the region stay quiet, fearing they might lose their jobs or be denied tenure. Journalists learn to use careful, neutral language that often hides the reality of the power imbalance. They'll say clashes broke out instead of describing a military assault on protesters. They'll talk about both sides needing to de-escalate, even when one side is an occupier with a nuclear-armed military and the other is an occupied population with rockets and stones. The Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, in his book The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, makes an even stronger claim. He argues that the very founding of Israel involved the forcible removal of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and that this history has been so effectively erased from the mainstream conversation in the West that even mentioning it is seen as a radical, hateful act. The goal of this narrative machine, critics say, is to make the cost of speaking out too high. It creates a situation where you can criticize any other country on Earth. You can condemn China for its treatment of the Uyghurs. You can condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. You can condemn the United States for its history of slavery or its wars in the Middle East. But if you apply the same standards of international law and human rights to Israel, you enter a danger zone. You risk your reputation, your career, your public standing. And so, most people choose not to. They choose silence. The tragedy here is twofold. It not only stifles the debate we need to have, but it also does a disservice to the real fight against anti-Semitism. When the term is used to defend the actions of a state, it can lose its meaning. It makes it harder to identify and fight the actual dangerous hatred of Jewish people. But in the corridors of power, the calculation is simple. The risk of being labeled is greater than the reward of speaking the truth. And so the silence continues. Every system needs an architect, a designer, a source of power that holds the whole structure up. In the system of silence surrounding Palestine, that architect is, for the most part, the United States. It's not just about silence. American support is loud, it is clear, and it is measured in billions of dollars. Currently, the U.S. provides Israel with over $3.8 billion in military aid every year. This is not a loan. It is a gift from the American taxpayer. It is enshrined in a 10-year agreement, so the money flows automatically, regardless of who is in the White House or what policies Israel is pursuing. This money is used to buy the most advanced weaponry in the world. F-35 fighter jets, Apache helicopters, bunker-busting bombs, and the missile defense system known as the Iron Dome. This aid is given with almost no conditions. There are no clauses that say the weapons cannot be used in densely populated civilian areas. There are no restrictions that tie the money to upholding international law. This material support is the foundation, but the political support is just as important. At the United Nations Security Council, the U.S. has used its veto power dozens of times to block resolutions that would condemn Israeli actions. Resolutions calling for an end to illegal settlements, for investigations into war crimes, or for a simple one vote from one country can paralyze the entire international community. So why? Why this unconditional, multi-generational support from a country thousands of miles away? The official reason given to the public is about shared values, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. But strategists and historians point to a more practical reason. As the scholar Rashid Khalidi explains in his book The 100 Years' War on Palestine, the U.S. has long seen Israel as a vital strategic asset, an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of the most oil-rich and politically volatile region on the planet. After World War II, the U.S. took over from Britain as the dominant global power. Its goal was to secure the flow of oil from the Middle East and to prevent influence from its rival, the Soviet Union. Israel, with its powerful, Western-trained military and stable government, became the perfect partner. It was seen as a reliable regional watchdog, a force that could be counted on to protect American interests, to gather intelligence, and to keep its neighbors in check. This alliance solidified over decades. It became a core principle of American foreign policy, supported by both Democrats and Republicans. An entire political ecosystem grew around it in Washington. Pro-Israel lobbying groups became some of the most powerful in the country, ensuring that support for Israel remained politically untouchable. This relationship serves a useful political function at home. When violence erupts, the narrative is immediately framed as one of self-defense. Israel, a nuclear power with one of the world's most advanced armies, is presented as a small, vulnerable nation under constant threat. Its actions, no matter how destructive, are described as necessary responses to terrorism. This framing makes it very difficult for the average American citizen or politician to question the policy. After all, who wouldn't support an ally defending itself? It's a simple, powerful story, and it works. It allows the architect to fund the construction of the system while telling its own citizens that it is merely helping a friend in need. The billions of dollars in weapons, the diplomatic vetoes, the political cover, they are all part of a strategic calculation made decades ago. A calculation that sees Israel not just as a country, but as an instrument of American power in a critical part of the world. And the human cost of that calculation is a price that, for Washington, has always been worth paying. There is a war on the ground, with bombs and guns. And then there is the other war, the war of words. In this war, the goal is to control the story, to control the meaning of what people see. In recent years, human rights organizations have used increasingly strong language to describe the situation in Palestine. In 2021, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, and later Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, published major reports. They all came to the same conclusion, that Israel's policies against Palestinians amounted to the crime of apartheid. This is a word with a heavy weight, defined in international law as a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination. They pointed to two different legal systems for Jews and Palestinians in the West Bank. They pointed to the siege of Gaza. They pointed to laws that they said privileged Jewish citizens over others. But in the mainstream political and media discussion, that word is almost never used. It is considered too controversial, too extreme. Instead, a different set of words is used. When a residential tower block is leveled by an F-35 jet, it is not the bombing of a home. It is a surgical strike on a terrorist command center. When a hospital runs out of fuel because of a blockade and its incubators for premature babies shut down, it is not a siege causing a humanitarian catastrophe. It is a security measure to prevent resources from reaching Hamas. When an entire population is denied sufficient food and water, with officials on record saying they want to create a total siege, this is not collective punishment, which is a war crime. It is part of a defense operation. This is a process of rebranding. It's a deliberate use of language to change our emotional and moral reaction to what we are seeing. The goal is to sanitize the violence, to make it seem logical, necessary, and even legal. This war of words becomes even clearer when we look at the double standards. Consider the global reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The world rightly rose in condemnation. The resistance of the Ukrainian people was celebrated as heroic. They were seen as freedom fighters defending their homeland. Western nations rushed to send them weapons. Companies pulled out of Russia. Athletes were banned from competitions. There was a moral clarity. Now, consider the Palestinians. When they resist their occupation, which has lasted for over half a century, their resistance is almost universally labeled as terrorism. Any act of violence by Palestinians is used to condemn the entire population. But the far greater systematic violence of the state occupying them is framed as legitimate self-defense. The scholar Edward Said wrote about this phenomenon in his book Covering Islam. He showed how Western media often portrays Arabs and Muslims through a lens of suspicion and violence, while framing its own actions as rational and civilized. According to this view, there are worthy victims and unworthy victims. A Ukrainian child killed by a Russian bomb is a worthy victim. The story will be on the front page. The world will mourn. But a Palestinian child killed by an Israeli bomb is an unworthy victim. Their death will be a statistic in a brief report on page 12, often accompanied by a justification that a terrorist was hiding nearby. This is the ultimate power of narrative control. It allows a system of oppression to continue in plain sight because it has been given a different name. It's not apartheid, it's a complex security dispute. It's not ethnic cleansing, it's a tragic conflict over land. It's not the collective punishment of millions, it's a war on terror. By controlling the words, you control the reality. You can make a massacre sound like a police action, and you can make an entire global audience either agree with you or become so confused and fatigued by the competing stories that they simply turn the channel. This too is a form of silence. The silence of a distracted and misled world. While the palaces and parliaments are quiet, the streets are not. In Amman, the capital of Jordan. In Cairo, the capital of Egypt. Across Morocco, Tunisia, and in diaspora communities in Europe and America. When the bombs fall on Gaza, the people march. They carry Palestinian flags. They chant slogans that have been passed down through generations. They feel a deep, personal connection to the struggle. For many in the Arab world, Palestine is not a foreign policy issue, it is a family issue, and a wound in the heart of their world. They see the inaction of their leaders, and they are furious. They see it as a betrayal, not just of the Palestinians, but of their own dignity. Their chants are often not just for Gaza. They are also against their own rulers. They shout against the presidents and the kings, who they see as collaborators in the oppression. But then nothing happens. The protests rage for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then they fade. The policies do not change. The leaders do not listen. Why? Because in the 21st century, authoritarian regimes have become incredibly sophisticated at insulating themselves from their own people. The scholar Mark Lynch calls this the new Arab Wars, a system where regimes have learned the lessons of the 2011 Arab Spring and have built walls around their power. Their first tool is the crushing of civil society. Independent unions, student groups, human rights organizations, these have all been systematically dismantled in many of these countries. There are no organized groups left that can channel popular anger into a real political challenge. Their second tool is technology. The same technology that connects us all can also be used to control us. As described by Shoshana Zuboff in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, modern surveillance is no longer just about listening to phone calls. It is about monitoring all digital life. Governments use sophisticated software, often bought from Israeli or Western companies, to track social media activity, to read private messages, to identify protest leaders. They use internet blackouts and censorship to stop people from organizing. The moment a movement begins to gain traction online, it can be shut down. The third tool is fear. Everyone knows there is a red line. You can protest about Gaza for a little while. The regime might even allow it as a way for people to let off steam. But if you start to criticize your own government too directly, if you call for the fall of the regime, the consequences are swift. Arrest, imprisonment, and worse. This creates a population that is politically atomized. They may all feel the same anger when they watch the news from Gaza in their living rooms, but they are afraid to talk to their neighbors about it, afraid to organize, because they don't know who is listening. The rage is real, the solidarity is real, but it is powerless. It is a cry in a soundproofed room. The leaders are safe behind their walls of surveillance and repression. They know that they do not need the consent of their people to rule. They only need the consent of their international patrons and the silence of their military and police. And so we are left with a final, bitter irony. The people with the most power to act, the leaders of the world, choose silence out of political calculation. And the people with the most desire to act, the citizens in the streets, are silenced by force. So we return to where we began, the silence. It is not an absence, it is a structure, a carefully built and maintained system. It is the silence of Arab leaders who trade solidarity for survival, dependent on the same power that enables the occupation. It is the silence of an Egyptian government that acts as a gatekeeper, driven by its own strategic fears. It is the silence of Western politicians and journalists, chilled by a narrative machine that makes speaking out too costly. And it is all underwritten by the architect. by the United States, which provides the weapons, the money, and the diplomatic shield, all in the name of a strategic interest defined decades ago. This system rebrands violence as security, and it creates a world of double standards where some victims are worthy of our tears and others are not. It works to confuse, distract, and fatigue us so that we eventually turn away. To observe this system is not to be a cynic. It is to be a realist. It is to understand that global politics is often not a contest of ideas or morals. It is a contest of power. And in this contest, the fate of millions of people in a tiny strip of land has been decided by calculations made in faraway capitals, for reasons that have almost nothing to do with them. The silence is the sound of that system working exactly as it was designed,